If you're buying in Houston, you're going to hear the word flood zone a lot. And most of the stress I see come from people trying to make sense of a yes or no decision based on one label. Today, I'm going to break down the flood zones in a practical way and show you my vetting process, the framework I use for buyers and relocation clients, so you can make a confident decision without fear or guesswork. I'm Raquel Bell with Bell Property Group. I help buyers across West Houston, including Katy, on how to evaluate risk realistically, because the goal isn't to eliminate every possible risk. The goal is to understand it and protect yourself with smart due diligence. And remember, I'm a realtor, not an engineer or an insurance agent. What I'm sharing is my buyer consult process, how I help clients investigate a property before they commit. Here's a simple breakdown. A flood zone is a map-based designation that helps describe the likelihood of flooding. The most common terms buyers hear are a 100-year floodplain and a 500-year floodplain here in Texas. The 100-year floodplain doesn't mean it floods once every 100 years. It means there's a 1% chance per year based upon the model. 500-year is a lower likelihood, often described as a 0.2% chance per year. Something else to keep in mind, flood zones are helpful, but they are not a crystal ball. Water doesn't read maps, and that's why we look at more than one data point. Let's clear up 3 myths I hear often. Myth number 1, if it's not in a flood zone, it can't flood. Not true. Drainage, elevation, and local runoff still matter. Flood maps are a helpful baseline. However, they're not a guarantee. In Houston, we've seen events like Hurricane Harvey, where rainfall sits over an area for days. When you get that kind of duration and volume, flooding can happen outside of map floodplains. Why? Because drainage systems get overwhelmed and water flows the path of least resistance. That's why I don't rely on one label. I look at the full picture. How does the lot sit? How the street drains, nearby waterways, and the neighborhood patterns. So you're making a decision based on real-world conditions, not just the map. Myth number 2, if it's in a flood zone, you should not buy it. This is also not true. Some buyers choose those homes strategically, but only after we verify, understand insurance implications, and price the risk correctly. Example, homes that took on water or limited water during a historical flood like Harvey. Why? Because the annual risk is often still low. It's simply being flagged on a map. Bottom line, if a home is in a flood zone, we treat it strategically. We verify history, understand insurance implications up front, and make sure the pricing and terms reflect the risk. When buyers see it in context, they're usually much more at ease. Myth number 3, flood insurance is only needed if the lender requires it. Not true. Lender requirements are based upon today's flood map, not tomorrow's storm. In a coastal region like ours, historic weather events can happen early or later than expected. That's why I often recommend considering flood insurance even when it's not required, because you're not just buying a home, you're protecting an asset. When buyers ask, where should I be concerned most? I don't answer with a neighborhood name. I answer with property characteristics, because that's what actually translates across West Houston. Here are some areas that may raise concerns for buyers. Homes on low-lying streets where water naturally collects. Areas with older drainage infrastructure or noticeable grading issues. Any property with a history of water intrusion or unclear disclosures. In other words, I look at how the property sits on the land and how the surrounding area moves water. Here's my exact process. It's consistent, it's repeatable, and it may protect buyers. First, we review the map, the starting point, not the conclusion. We're going to check the FEMA flood maps as a baseline. I'm looking at the zone designation and the proximity to mapped floodplains. After that, we'll check the seller's disclosure and property history. If there's anything unclear, we don't gloss over it, we clarify. Next, I look at how the area behaves, not just the house. If homes nearby have known patterns of water issues, that matters. If the street itself is shaped like a bowl, that matters too. Next, we'll look at the on-site drainage clues. This is what I point out during my showings. On my tours, this is where I'm very hands-on. I'm watching for things buyers usually miss. This is your grading around the foundation. Where does the downspouts discharge? Is landscaping directing water away from the home? Visible drainage paths, inlets, and how water moves within heavy rain. We'll also look at signs of prior waterline marks or repeated repairs that suggest a pattern. Before we're out of the option period, I want an insurance conversation started, especially if the home is near a floodplain or the buyer is risk sensitive. That way we're not guessing about costs or requirements. That's the luxury level standard. We don't get surprised late in the process. Once we've done that vetting, it affects how we negotiate. Depending upon what we find, we may adjust the following: inspection strategies, terms and timelines, request additional documentation, and how we evaluate the home's overall value relative to risk. The goal is to be precise. If you're buying in the West Houston and surrounding area, give me a call. I will help you vet a specific area based upon your priorities. Until next time.